Conversations with Azu Ishekwele.
How is it in your part of town, regardless of whether you're in Abuja or Lagos or Birnin Kebbi or Maiduguri or Calabar? Irrespective of where you are, we're talking about the rolling blackouts and the heat wave. This forms the subject of Deepening the Conversation, our interactive segment on Conversation with Azu, a weekly diary on life and politics on the back page of Leadership newspaper and other newspapers besides. Azu, the writer of this column, is joining us on Zoom from Lagos to discuss the subject of his column today, which is about blackouts and the heat wave, and of course, the fallout of the absence of the two. Welcome to Deepening the Conversation, Azu.
Thank you for having me, Julius. As a matter of fact, as I speak with you, a neighbor's generator is humming by the side. The light just went up a few minutes. I really don't know for sure whether we're on generator or on the public power supply. I don't know how this might go, whether we might have a few rolling blackouts before this is over. But, well, it's nice to be back. Thank you.
You are not the only one that seems to think that there is someone who has a responsibility to turn off the electricity at the grid. Some of us think that there's somebody who is specifically appointed to switch off the lights, because the lights go off whether or not there is a lockdown or there's an emergency or whatever the situation might be. I'd like you to comment on this.
Yes, thank you, Julius. As I said in my column, you see, I grew up with this impression, which you just expressed in your opening remarks, that there are some folks in the at the substation, at the PHCN or disco office closest to you, whose job absolutely it is to just mess around with the light switches, and they just do it, without really caring much. Honestly, the frequency with which we have had this load shedding, or what you call rolling blackouts, has been quite extraordinary, especially again, as you said in your opening remarks, because of the heat wave that we have experienced in the last couple of weeks. With daytime temperature has been anything between 35, 40, sometimes 42 degrees, especially in places like Abuja and upcountry. It's really been extremely and extraordinarily hot and uncomfortable for most folks who depend, as most of us in the urban centers do, for power supply from the public power supply or from our own privately generated power sources, which has become quite expensive, to maintain these days.
You're not the right person I should ask this question, but I will nevertheless. What really is the problem? At this time every year, there seems to be a lot of power fluctuations. Why does Nigeria just have to rely on hydroelectricity? Because generally it is said the water level would have gone down and there's no turning of the turbines. But just a few days back, there was this report that by the minister was accusing the electricity distribution companies of not being able to generate the 4,000 megawatts that is generated. How is this so?
Well, again, I think you're right. I'm not an expert at power generation or transmission or distribution or marketing. And as you say, the minister has expressed his view about the performance of the distribution companies. But I think that as far as I know, Nigeria gets its power from largely two major sources, largely from gas and from hydro. But I think that gas currently constitutes a large bulk of the source of power generation in the country. But unfortunately, in the last couple of years, the turbines, the gas turbines and the grids have been down considerably out of a number of reasons, ranging from poor maintenance and replacement of parts and so forth and so on. To all sorts of reasons have been adduced for the shortage of gas. I think that has been the principal reason for the rolling blackouts we have experienced in current times. The grids have been down because there isn't just enough gas to, to service them. Another potential area, of course, of generation is the hydro. But as you also see, at this time of the year, the water level tends to go down. And but the hydro really shouldn't be a problem if we had a plan that a power plan or a power infrastructure that sort of distributes according to the resources in each particular area of the country. So, for example, in parts of the country where gas is abundant, especially in the south, if you depended principally on gas to generate, and then depended on hydro in areas where you have significant bodies of water, and then also depended on solar in areas where solar energy is abundant. So if we had multiple sources, aligned and cultivated and harnessed multiple sources of power generation, I don't think we will be the sort of problems we have been now. But just one more thing before I land on that. I think why the heat has also been on the distribution companies, is that it's been said that since the privatization of that sector, the people who took it over have not invested significantly in the infrastructure to really distribute power, and that they really have, a number of them have not paid enough attention to renewing or investing in infrastructure. They literally just have depended on the infrastructure that they took over from the company at the time they bought those assets. Even though the demand has continued to increase. And the transmission lines, of course, that's another problem entirely. Of course, as you know, transmission is still, even though there has also been a law currently to also allow the subnationals to take part in power generation and distribution. But generation and transmission are still significantly functions of the federal government, which has proved over the years totally incapable and of delivering on those parts of the service.
You made a reference in your column to other economies, South Africa and Kenya, perhaps, but that's not my question. Last week, Professor Tahir Mama, the Minister of Education, threatened to prove the 5 billion naira solar hybrid power project that was supposed to have been installed in Bayero University, Kano, and as at the time was not functional. And just few weeks, just few days, 2 days after his threat, that 7.1 megawatts of installation was brought alive, and Bayero University is now powered. The question really is, why does everyone in a federation as huge as Nigeria is, the subnationals and the different corporations, have to rely on one grid? Why do you think the government doesn't find it, it's not actually encouraging other institutions to depend on independent power sources that they can fund and develop of their own?
Well, I think that is changing slowly. The current news from Abia State, for example, is that there's a power grid that has just been provided by both a private company and I think it's a controversy on whether or not the state government is involved. But the important thing is that obviously the state government has led an effort to generate power. Part of it, of course, will, I suppose, be available for the national grid, but at least they would be able, residents in Abia State, both homes, communities, and businesses, would be able to get significant service from that, from what has just been done. And I'm hoping that we will have more and more of this. I think that there are increasingly a number of states and a number of businesses and a number of communities that are generating their own power, because where we are at in Nigeria, as I said in my column, the expectation in terms of delivery is about 80% less than the demand. So we're really far. We are falling really far short. But I think the important point that you made, especially about the example you gave of Bayero University, which I also referred to in my earlier comment, is that we really, given the amount of resources that we have, we should not be depending entirely on one major source of supply for electricity. It should be possible, depending on the part of the country and the type of the dominant form of energy prevalent there, for either the subnationals or independent private companies to be able to generate and to distribute, to the communities that they serve, without everybody depending solely, as now appears to be the case, on one major source to generate, to transmit, and then to distribute.
And there's a conspiracy theory that there are vested interests that are not interested in Nigeria's electricity working, just as they are not interested in Nigeria's refineries working, because Nigeria is a huge market for the importation of petroleum and generators. What's your take on this?
Well, I don't have a problem with vested interests. I mean, there are vested interests everywhere. And I think that that's perfectly legitimate. I remember there's a proverb in the southwest part of this country that the flood has not said it will not take down the building. It's up to the owner of the building to secure its property. So I don't have a problem with the vested interest. But the reason why governments, I guess the reason why governments exist is to ensure that it provides the sort of framework and environment that will enable both private businesses and all kinds of interests, including vested ones, to contend and then for people to get value. I think that is where the problem is. Those who are into generator business, that is not an illegitimate business if you are importing generator, but it is the operating environment that has continued to encourage that anomaly and has sort of made it the norm, okay, for us to run, provide ourselves with not just electricity, provide ourselves with, it's the sort of environment in which we found ourselves. So I think that it's important for the sort of the right framework and the incentives to be put in place so that people know people are clear what the framework is, what the parameters are, what the rules are. Then people can come in and then invest and then hope to deliver service and get value for it, including in the vested interest. Once you have a market that is fairly well regulated and everybody knows that, both vested and non-vested interests will find their levels. So I don't see a problem with that. It's because there's advantage to be taken. That's why people are taking the advantage, and that's normal. It's human. It's natural.
And finally, from me, once your gen goes off, maybe at night, and then the power also goes up from the grid, and you are hot and feeling like you want to rush into the bathroom to pour some water, and the baby is crying because it's uncomfortable from the heat. And then during the day, you witness a practical situation like Wuse Market. You walk into a market and every shop is running on a generator and the atmosphere is filled with smoke and noise. I mean, imagining this, how does it make you feel? The noise pollution, the environmental contamination.
Absolutely, Julius. Now you have touched on an aspect of the fallout of the poor power situation that we have in this country that I do not think we pay enough attention to, and that is the mental health problem associated with noise and the pollution as well. Unfortunately, we don't seem to pay enough attention to that, but I think we do need to pay some attention to it. And I think that a good place to start, as I say, would be for our research centers, for our universities, for communities to look at especially how we can use solar. I mean, that really is one of the most abundant forms of energy that and it takes care of the problem of environmental pollution. We really do, and it's there actually for the harvesting. So I think that the problem with solar now, of course, is that the cost of installation is relatively high. That, I think, is where we need to encourage our research institutes, our universities, and then some private sector, and maybe provide a government framework to see how we can make the solar option cheaper to install. I know folks now who actually are converting their domestic gas to some form of, of energy supply. But I think that especially in parts of the country where we have abundant sunshine, and intense sunshine, in fact, I think it's important for government to look at, in partnership, of course, with the private sector and research institutes, how solar energy can be made a lot cheaper for people to use to save ourselves from this misery of noise pollution and the trauma to our mental health from generators.
All right, I think this is a good place to leave it. These are just snipers we brought for you from today's column. And if you really want to get the gist of the conversation, visit us at azuishekwene.com, where you find very interesting content beyond the column, beyond pictures, beyond text, beyond lectures delivered, papers for seminars. If you're an academic, you're a student, you're a researcher, it is the place to go for rich and incisive content on almost every subject. Thank you for coming on the show, Azu.
Thanks for having me, Julius. Hopefully, I'm back in the studio again by God's grace next time.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our content. Thank you very much.
Conversations with Azu Ishekwene.